Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So this is a little bit of a different video. It's got nothing to do with feminism or men's rights or the usual topics I talk about. It's actually a promo for a new channel I started last year. Well, I didn't start the channel alone. I actually started it with two friends. Little Miss Anonymous and Big Master Anonymous, also known as BMA for short. And basically, we do very in-depth movie reviews and have a lot of fun along the way. So what we do is we pick a couple of movies and we go through them in great detail. So we talk about the plot and the characters and the director and the influences and the genre that it belongs to and the use of music and sound and the cinematography. It's very in-depth. And in case the name of this particular video, as well as the name of the channel and the name of the hangouts that we do, don't give it away, these movie reviews contain spoilers. So we highly recommend that you watch the movies in question before listening to our reviews. Now you may be asking what type of movie reviews we do, because YouTube's filled with channels doing reviews of movies. Well, we do a variety of movies, and no doubt there will be some that you've heard of and that you know of, and fairly mainstream and popular, but there's also a lot of obscure movies that we cover as well. In fact, out of all the movies we've covered so far, I seriously doubt there are too many of you out there who have seen them all. In fact, there may be no one who has seen them all. It's quite possible with some of the movies we've covered. So if you're a movie fan, like I am, and you want something a bit lighter than the usual stuff I cover on this channel, I highly recommend you go over and subscribe and click the bell and do all that other stuff that you have to do. And hopefully YouTube will send you some kind of notification, although knowing how YouTube is, they probably won't. But we can hope. We can cross our fingers and hope that maybe they will this particular time. So the rest of this video, I just want to talk about some of the movies we've covered so far, just to give you some kind of idea of what we do. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into any spoilers for the rest of this video. The spoilers are actually in our reviews. But for this, I'm just going to briefly talk about the movies, just to give you some kind of idea of what we cover. Now, to start off, we did a pilot just to see how we would go, right? And to find any things that we needed to improve and basically test the waters. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the pilot because we reviewed 4 movies which I'm pretty sure you've heard of. The first 2 movies were John Carpenter's The Thing, which you all should have seen. If you haven't seen it, seriously, what the fuck are you doing with your life? That should be on your list of movies that you have to see before you die. And we also reviewed the prequel to it, which is called The Thing. So clearly they spent a long time coming up with the name for the prequel. They probably had a whole panel working on it for 6 months to come up with that very, very unique name, because it's nothing like the original, is it? Now, the other 2 movies we reviewed in the pilot were The Blair Witch Project, which I have to say I'm not a big fan of. I know some people will probably criticize me for that, but I'm not a big fan of The Blair Witch, which I go into why in our review. We don't always agree, by the way, which is what makes the show interesting. And we also reviewed the sequel to The Blair Witch Project, which was called The Blair Witch. Now, clearly they got the exact same group of people who came up with the name for the Thing prequel to come up with the name for the Blair Witch Project sequel, because a lot of creativity went into that, no doubt about it. So I'm not going to go into what those movies are about here, because I'm sure you've all heard of them and probably seen them. But trust me, there are more obscure movies coming up. So the way we do the show is it's a 4-episode rotation. So the first episode out of the four episode cycle, I pick 2 movies, and then the next one, BMA picks 2 movies, and then the third one, Little Miss Anonymous, picks 2 movies, and then the 4th episode in a 4 episode cycle is a special, where we basically have a theme. It might be a director, and we go through some of his work or her work. It may be a topic, it may be movies based on an author. You get the idea. And for those shows, we pick a movie each, and they tend to be a little bit longer because of that. So the very first episode was my pick, and I picked 2 very good movies. Well, I'm saying that because I'm biased, but what can I do? The first one is by a very famous director, which no doubt you've heard of, Mr. Ridley Scott. Now, everyone out there should have at least heard of, if not seen, Ridley Scott's second movie, which was Alien, and his third movie, which was Blade Runner. But how many of you know his first movie? Now, I've got to say Ridley Scott really hit the ground running with his career, because I personally think his 3 first movies are his best work. Now, that's not to criticise the movies he's done since. He's been consistently good. But I would have to say, personally, my 3 favourites are his first 3 movies. So, of course, his first movie was The Duelists. It's a beautifully shot movie. It looks absolutely spectacular. And it takes place during the Napoleonic Wars over a 10-year period. Now, obviously they didn't have photos to use as references for the Napoleonic times, but they did have paintings, and you see this right throughout the movie. Shot after shot looks like some classical painting you'd see in an art gallery. Absolutely beautifully shot. It stars Harvey Keitel. I mean, do you really need any other reason to watch it other than that? And Keith Carradine. Now, a lot of you may not know who Keith Carradine is. He's David Carradine's brother, and in my opinion, the better actor of the 2. You would have seen him in something. He was in Dexter as a minor character, and he's been in lots of movies and TV shows. He never reached the same level of fame as his brother David. And the basic plot, which I'm not going to go into any great detail, so I won't spoil it, don't worry, but the basic plot is a dispute between 2 officers in Napoleon's army, and they keep coming across each other over a 10-year period, and the dispute continues. The characters are great. Like I said, it looks absolutely amazing. It's such a beautiful movie. The use of music and sound is great, and Ridley Scott only had a relatively small budget to make this, and he really did a great job with it. If you listen to the director's commentary on the DVD, you see, well, he tells you all the little tricks he used to really extend the budget. And if I remember correctly, he actually paid for the making of the uniforms out of his own pocket, because there wasn't a big budget for the movie, but it looks amazing. I originally saw this movie in the late 90s. It was late night on TV. It was a Sunday night. I was up late. I was thinking about going to bed. I thought, I'll just see what's on TV, and it came on, and I was captivated and stayed up and watched it to the end. And I think it was in 2003 or 2004 when it was released on DVD. I went and bought it that exact same day. So yeah, it impressed the hell out of me, and I've watched it probably 100 times since. Now, my second pick is also a movie I've watched probably 100 times since, despite its very, very long running time, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, this movie is an interesting one, because I remember hearing somewhere it was voted worst movie of the year, and it came out in 1984, but somewhere else it was voted best movie of the decade. Now, it may be a little bit confusing how a movie can get worst movie of the year, yet best movie of the decade. And the reason why is because there's different cuts of it. Now, the American release was the one that was voted worst movie of the year, and unfortunately, they cut almost half the movie out, which is insane when you think about it, cutting out almost half the story, and then they reordered the sequence of events, and they basically butchered it. Now, you may be thinking, if they cut out almost half the movie, it mustn't have been very long, but you'd be wrong, because the American release was 139 minutes, which is 2 hours and 19 minutes, which is pretty long for a movie. But you may be thinking, didn't Bane just say they cut out almost half of it? And yes, that's because the Euro version of it was 3 hours and 49 minutes. That's right, almost a 4-hour movie. And trust me, it's fucking worth it. But we didn't review either of those versions. We actually reviewed the extended cut. Yes, that's right, they released an extended cut of a movie that goes for 3 hours and 49 minutes. And the extended cut goes for 4 hours and 11 minutes. And trust me, that added footage, that restored footage, is great. It really adds a lot to the story. Even though some of it stands out because the quality isn't quite there. It's obviously been found and hasn't fared too well over the years, but it's still a great addition to an amazing movie. Now, a lot of you may be wondering, what the fuck is this movie that goes for almost 4 hours or over 4 hours, depending on what cut that you're talking about? Well, it's actually in my opinion, the greatest gangster movie ever made. Now, when I say that, you may be thinking of Goodfellas or The Godfather or Casino or something like that. It's none of them. It's Once Upon a Time in America. So my first pick was the first movie ever made by a director, and this was the last movie ever made by a director. Directed, of course, by Sergio Leone, who was very famous for his spaghetti westerns. And the movie takes place over 3 time periods. So it takes place in the 1920s, the 1930s, and in 1968. And we see a group of characters, one character in particular, grow and change. And the story cuts back between the different time periods, slowly building up the story. It's very effective. Beautifully shot, great use of music. A great cast of actors, including Robert De Niro. Do I really need to say more? James Woods is also in it. And if you haven't seen this movie, don't let the length of it put you off. If a 4-hour movie seems too long for you, then just watch it in 2 parts. Treat it like a TV miniseries. It's worth it, trust me. So, episode 2 was BMA's pick. And he picked, the first movie he picked was Discopathy, which is a Canadian horror movie which has its tongue firmly planted in its cheek. It's set in the late 70s and the early 80s, and it's about a guy who goes crazy and starts killing people whenever he hears disco music. Now, personally, I can relate to that. I think we can all relate to that to some degree. Who hasn't listened to a bad disco song and wanted to kill someone? This is a great Canadian horror movie, and like I said, it does have its tongue firmly planted in its cheek. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a horror comedy, but it's comedy-ish. It's nicely shot and nicely acted, and it definitely is shot in a sense that it's reflective of the time that it's set. It definitely has that 70s feel about it. Now, BMA's second pick is much more interesting, and I'm going to say it contains one of the most beautifully shot opening scenes I've ever seen in a movie. In fact, the opening 5 minutes is some of the most beautiful cinema I've ever seen, full stop. The first 5 minutes is shot entirely in slow motion and black and white, with no dialogue or sound apart from classical music, which suits it perfectly. Absolutely beautiful. It's a work of art, that first 5 minutes. Now, the rest of the movie is in colour, and is quite dark and disturbing. Just a warning. You shouldn't watch this movie if you're depressed. It's not a happy movie, and it won't put you in a happy place. So, not to go too much into the plot because I don't want to spoil it, it's basically about a couple. A tragedy happens in that first 5 minutes, and the wife isn't coping with it too well, and the husband, being a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, I think, he recommends that they go to a cabin in the woods to work things out. Now, I have to ask the question, when has that ever gone wrong in a movie? Seriously? Going to a cabin in the woods always works out so well in movies, doesn't it? Now, there are a number of scenes in this movie that I would really like to tell you about here, but I don't want to spoil it. Needless to say, it can get quite intense. I am talking about the movie Antichrist, of course. And no, it's not actually about the devil or anything like that. Although there may be some supernatural shenanigans going on in the background. It's really unclear. But it is a very, very interesting movie. It's beautifully made. Very dark and disturbing, though. So, yeah, make sure you're in the right mood when you watch it. And it may be some time before you watch it a second time. But I do recommend you watch it at least once. So, episode 3 was a non's pick. And she picked, for her first movie, a Korean horror movie set on a train, which is, of course, called Train to Busan. Now, I have to say, I'd never seen this movie before she picked this movie for her review. In fact, it's now one of my all-time favourite zombie movies. That's right, it's a Korean zombie movie set on a train. And it's great. The zombies are great. The actors are great. It's beautifully shot. It had my interest from beginning to end. I don't want to go into any more detail because I don't want to spoil it. But really, do I need to go into any more detail other than it's a zombie movie on a train? That should be enough. And if you're a horror fan and you haven't seen this movie, I don't know what the fuck you've been doing, but you should go watch it. Now, her second pick. Wow, how do I describe this movie? It's an animated movie, and it's not only one of the most beautifully animated movies I've ever seen, I'd have to say it's one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. It's stunning to look at, but it is so fucking disturbing, the topic. Yeah, it's not a happy movie at all. So you have this beautifully shot, or beautifully animated movie with a very, very disturbing topic. It's Japanese, it's set during World War II in Japan, and it's about two children surviving, barely surviving, and it's pretty fucking brutal. It's dark and nasty, yet just stunning to look at. It's once again, I don't want to go into any more detail because I don't want to talk about what happens to these kids, but it's not fucking pleasant. Let me put it that way. I'd highly recommend you watch it at least once, though. It is such a beautifully shot movie, or beautifully animated movie. Now, episode 4 was our first special, and it was called It's All About Dick. Of course, we were referring to movies based on science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. Now, there's been a lot of movies based on Philip K. Dick's stories. Probably the most famous is Blade Runner. Now, we didn't pick that for this particular show because we're probably going to do a Blade Runner special sometime later on. But the movies we did pick and reviewed were A Scanner Darkly, another animated movie. This one uses rotoscope, so basically they shot the actors normally and then animate it based on that footage. It's a very effective means of animating, and it looks great. And to be honest with you, I don't know how it would have gone live action, if it hadn't been animated. I think a movie like this really needs to be animated. And not to go too deeply into the story, because I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it, it's about an undercover cop who is living amongst some drug addicts, but he's using drugs himself. And he starts to wonder whether he's actually an undercover cop or he's a drug addict who's pretending to be a cop, and his reality starts to become very, very confused, which is very typical of Philip K. Dick. We actually spent a fair bit of time talking about Philip K. Dick and some of the influences on his work, including his mental health issues, and how much of his work is about personal identity and subjective reality versus objective reality. And it's a theme we see over and over again in his work, where we don't actually know, or the protagonist doesn't actually know, whether they're in reality or whether they're imagining reality. And the question is often asked, what's the difference? If you perceive something as real, then it is real to you. It is as real as reality to someone else. And that brings us to our second pick, Total Recall, which you all should have seen, I assume. It's a very famous movie, easily the most famous out of the three we picked. But that has the same theme, where someone has implanted memories and they don't know if their reality is real or whether the memories are implanted. And it's, once again, very Philip K. Dick. And the third movie is Paycheck. Now, not to go into it too deeply or to give away the plot, it's about a guy who reverse engineers technology and for other companies. So someone might have a new computer or something and he figures out how it works, but then he has his memory of doing that erased, so he can't sell that information to another company. So he's paid quite well for that, and someone offers him a job to do that for 2 years, which is a lot longer than he normally does, but it's for, I think it was $90 million or something like that. So he goes and does the job for 2 years, and then he has that 2 years of his life erased, and he goes to the bank expecting to get the big paycheck, only to find that he's got an envelope with knickknacks in it. And the week before, he had signed away his $90 million for an envelope filled with bits and pieces like a paperclip and a subway token and things like that, which doesn't make any sense. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to go into anything else. I recommend that you watch this movie once. Only once. And the reason why is because once you know what's going to happen, there's no need to watch it again. That's the appeal, figuring out what's going on. The other two movies I recommend you watch numerous times, especially A Scanner Darkly, because there's so much in that particular movie which you get from subsequent watchings. And in fact, that's one of the things I think really makes a great movie, is the fact that you can watch it over and over and over again, and you get as much, if not more, enjoyment out of it every time, and pick up on little details that you may have missed before. And A Scanner Darkly is definitely like that, as is Total Recall. But as Total Recall's quite a well-known movie, and it's, 30 years old or something like that, you've probably already seen it a dozen times anyway. So the next episode after that was episode 5, and it was my picks again, and I picked a movie which I think most of you have probably never heard of. It goes by two different names depending on where it was released. Either Two Pigeons or Freehold. It's a comedy. It's a dark comedy. It is a beautiful little low-budget movie which is entertaining from beginning to end. I only saw it for the first time just over a year ago, and I reckon I've watched it 12 times since then and enjoyed it each and every time. It's about a real estate agent, a young 20-something real estate agent who's fairly arrogant and full of himself and a bit of an asshole. And we see him get ready for work, and he goes off to work, and then something comes out from under his bed. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that something is, because it will spoil the movie. Like I said before, I highly recommend you watch these movies before listening to our reviews. Unfortunately, I can't tell you anything else about this movie without spoiling it. And I don't want to do that, because it's such a good movie. And it is a beautiful little low-budget dark comedy, which I cannot recommend enough. My second pick was Santa Sangre by legendary director Alejandro Jodorowsky. Uh, what can I say about this? Jodorowsky fills his movies with bizarre and interesting characters. I don't want to go into the plot. I don't want to talk about it in any detail. It's something you just need to watch and experience. It is bizarre. It is interesting. It is strange. It is a very, very strange movie. It will probably be one of the strangest movies you've ever seen. But I'm actually doing a review of a Jodorowsky movie tomorrow in our next show, which I'll get to at the end. And that's an even weirder movie. I'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, Santa Sangre, I don't really know how to describe it without spoiling it. So just go and watch it. It's such a fucking bizarre movie. It really is. Episode 6 was BMA's pick again. He picked a movie from 1990 called The Reflecting Skin. It's set in the 1950s in a small town in the middle of nowhere in America. And it's pretty much told from the viewpoint of a young boy. It looks interesting. The way the director shot it, and he's obviously altered the colours, which I personally find quite disturbing. I found this movie disturbing when I first saw it. Hard to watch almost, just because the colours are a bit out. They're tweaked. They're exaggerated. Certain colours, that is. And the story's also disturbing and weird and interesting. And it's like I said, it's told from the point of view of a young boy in a town. And I pretty much think just about all the characters are fucked up. Yeah, I can't really go into any more without spoiling it. His second pick, though, was Under the Skin, which is a great low-budget sci-fi movie. Now, this movie stars Scarlett Johansson, naked. Do I really need to say anything else? But apart from that, it's also a great movie. Scarlett Jo does a fantastic job in this movie. It's beautifully shot. There is very little dialogue in it, so most of it is visuals. And the atmosphere is created through the use of visuals and music. Some visuals in particular are just really beautiful to look at. I won't say what. Once again, I don't want to spoil it. So yeah, basically, not to go too deep into the plot, which isn't all that complex, but it doesn't really need to be. It's about an alien disguised in human skin who lures men to their death and removes their skin. And if you haven't seen this one, once again, I highly recommend it. Now, episode 7 was actually a special, and I know the special came early, but that's because it was Christmas. So we did a Christmas special, and we picked a movie each. The 3 movies were Black Christmas, which is a 70s Christmas-themed horror movie. Krampus, which is a Christmas-themed horror comedy movie. And Bad Santa, which is a Christmas-themed comedy movie. So, 3 fairly different movies there, all with a Christmas theme. Now, episode 8 has 2 movies which I'm guessing most of you have not seen, and I highly recommend you watch both of them, but if you only watch one, it has to be the second one, which I'll get to in a moment, but first let's discuss Darling. Low budget, black and white, horror, beautifully shot, beautiful use of black and white. I love black and white movies if it's shot well and if it's appropriate for the particular movie, and in this case, yes, that's exactly what happened. Great use of sound and music, beautiful little low budget black and white horror movie, which you should go and watch if you haven't. I'm guessing not too many people have seen it, which is unfortunate. But not as unfortunate as the next movie, because it is an amazing movie. It is a beautifully shot movie, and I guarantee you that barely any of you out there, maybe none of you, have ever seen it or heard of it. It's virtually unknown, and I've never seen or heard anyone else do a review of it, and I think that is fucking criminal, because this is such an amazing movie. It's called The Eyes of My Mother. Once again, it is a black and white movie. It's only recent too, it's like 3 or 4 years old, but shot in black and white, and it is extremely effective in black and white. It would not have been as effective in colour. You wouldn't have heard of any of the actors. I think this was the director's first movie, which is astounding because the director does such an amazing job. Great story. It's a horror movie, but no supernatural shenanigans in it. And it's extremely disturbing. Let me warn you, this movie will disturb you, which is great. It's great to actually watch a horror movie which has that effect on you. That's what it should do, being a horror movie. People often talk about Silence of the Lambs, which is a great movie, but I don't find that movie anywhere near as disturbing as this little low-budget movie that virtually no one's heard of. So, if you watch one movie, out of all the movies I've talked about, I highly recommend that one. And it's not even my pick. That's how good it is. Now, we're almost done, folks. I know this has been a bit long, but we're almost done. The last episode we done actually went for 5 hours. Yes, I know that's long. We were tired by the end of it, but to be honest with you, we had such a good time, it went pretty quick for us. It didn't feel like 5 hours until we got off air, and then we felt very tired. But once again, it was a theme show, and the theme was Cthulhu, or to be more exact, movies based on Cthulhu myth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that these movies were based on H.P. Lovecraft stories. One of them was, the other two weren't. But there is a clear influence by Lovecraft's work. So the first movie we talked about was The Void, which once again is a low-budget horror movie. A lot of you probably haven't seen it or heard of it, which is unfortunate because it's a fucking good movie. You should go watch it. It's better than a lot of the big-budget Hollywood shit that comes out every single year. The second movie, which was my pick, was an 80s schlock horror based on a Lovecraft story, which firmly had its tongue poked in its cheek right throughout. Didn't take itself too serious, which is part of the charm of this movie. I am, of course, talking about From Beyond. And the third movie, I'm guessing most of you have probably heard of, if not seen, and that's The Mist, based on the Stephen King story, which is a fucking great movie. I love that movie. Unfortunately, the TV series, which was based on the same story, which came out, I think, about 2 years ago, was absolutely fucking shit. But the movie is great. If you haven't seen it, you should, especially if you're a horror fan. Now, that brings us to our next episode, which is tomorrow. So that would be Friday night if you're in America, and Saturday afternoon if you're an Aussie like me. I'm not sure when that is in UK time, probably in the middle of the night. Sorry, guys. But once again, it's my picks, so I have picked two extremely interesting movies. Fuck, it's going to be an interesting show. I've been looking forward to this one for a long, long time because I've picked two extremely interesting movies. The first one is a very, very low-budget movie, which I have to say is the greatest comedy ever fucking made. I've never laughed so hard as when I've watched this movie, and I've watched it about 4 times now. And every time I laugh so hard, my gut is just twisted in a knot, and I have tears streaming down my face. It is literally the greatest comedy ever written. Unfortunately for the writer, director, and star, it was meant to be a serious spy drama. I am, of course, talking about Double Down by Neil Breen. Now, if you don't know who Neil Breen is, well, he was a real estate agent who decided that he was going to make movies. And good on him, I say. I like that. I like the fact that he just decided, that he was going to make movies, and he got a camera, and he had a go. And I think that's a good attitude. Unfortunately, he just failed miserably. And this movie is so fucking funny. It is so funny from beginning to end in every single fucking way. The plot is just confused. The characters are confused. The acting is bad. Now, I can kind of forgive the acting to a certain degree because it's a low-budget independent movie and Neil Breen's put his own money into it, so I can kind of let that go. But the way it's directed is just so bad, and it's just so bizarre, and it's clearly just a vanity project for Neil. And if you've seen The Room, or you know about The Room, which is an hilarious movie, in my opinion, this one's even funnier. But it's kind of like that, you know. It's a movie which was meant to be serious, but is in fact a fucking great comedy. Now, the second movie I picked, wow, that's very different. I mentioned Alejandro Jodorowsky earlier with Santa Sangre. This one is an earlier movie he made, which is even weirder, called Holy Mountain. Wow, what a fucking trip this movie is. And when I say it's a fucking trip, that's not a surprise, because Alejandro Jodorowsky was on acid at the time. He wrote, directed, and starred in it, and it's about a spiritual journey. It's very weird. It's filled with symbolism from beginning to end. It's very dense with layers of meaning and symbolism. Beautifully shot, especially some of the scenes in the middle where he uses a lot of bright colours and geometric shapes. It's quite stunning, that bit. As always with Jodorowsky movies, the characters are bizarre and interesting. If I ever write a book on Jodorowsky, I think I'll call it Prostitutes and Dwarfs, because all these movies seem to have prostitutes and dwarfs in them. I don't know why. It just seems to be one of those things. And one of the prostitutes has a pet chimp. I'm not exactly sure why. I can figure out most of the symbolism in this movie, but I don't get the chimp part. Maybe Jodorowsky was just particularly high that day and decided that they needed a chimp with the prostitute. I don't know. I don't know if he knows. It's a mystery. But it's a beautiful movie. It's a bizarre movie. It's a trip from beginning to end. And I remember the first time I watched it, which was only probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I was just stunned by the end of it, and stunned in a good way, not a bad way, not like Double Down, which had me trying to pick myself up from the ground with laughter. No, I was stunned by Holy Mountain just by the bizarreness and the density of the symbolism right throughout. But it is strange. If you like strange stuff, fucking go watch it. What more can I say? And we're live. And somewhat late.
You okay?
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show that's always late.
We know we've been on time about 50% of the time.
Okay, last time we were 24 hours late, so now we're only 23 minutes late. So we're improving
Slowly,
yeah. And,
did you just say that the show is always late? That's a spoiler.
Yes, and the show is in fact full of spoilers because there will be spoilers. Right throughout the show, from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to ruin everything.
Yep.
All of it.
Yep. Darth Vader is Luke's father, in case you didn't know.
Oh, that's not even a movie we were talking about.
I know. I just thought I'd go crazy, and I want to ruin everyone's Christmas.
Bruce
Get in
Willis
early.
Dead.
You have ruined everyone's Christmas well over 300 days in advance.
Yeah. That's the type of guy I am. So, you know.
especially that one fellow over there in I think that's Russia, who hasn't seen The Empire Strikes Back.
I know. And he was saving it for Christmas this year.
Oh.
When it comes out in theaters 33 years ago.
So, yes, this is There Will Be Spoilers, and we're here to review some Lovecraftian-inspired movies. So if you haven't seen these movies, just be warned that we will talk about them in great detail and probably spoil them for you if you haven't seen them. So there. The three movies we're talking about. The three movies we're talking. Hey, forgive me. All right, it's been really hot here for the last couple of days, and I haven't slept very well. It was 45 yesterday.
That's
I
don't know what that is in American, but
you're a little bit delirious. You could say that you are going insane, which is very appropriate.
Yes, but I haven't opened a dimension or porthole to another dimension.
Oh,
so
on. You don't want to go visit.
Yeah.
You don't want to go visit.
I'm saving that for the end of the show. So
okay, all right.
Are we going to the space pyramid, or which one of the dimensions are we going to? Because I don't want to go to the slimy one.
Well, they're all a little slimy.
Yeah, the slimy ones are the best.
No, I don't want to go to the goopy dimension. I go to the space pyramid. That's fine.
Where do you think they get KY jelly from? They just got like
that pyramid.
They're milking. Yeah. They're milking fucking Lovecraft.
They got a tap, which is attached to another dimension, and it just comes out.
Cthulhu teats.
Milking Cthulhu for KY.
That's a great screen name. I wonder if someone's taken that.
Cthulhu teats? I don't know. We should tell Omegon to change his handle to that.
Well, I from this day forth, I will call Omegon nothing but Cthulhu teats. I promise. Let it be known.
And it is so.
So, the three movies we're reviewing today are The Void, From Beyond, and The Mist. But should we maybe just briefly talk about Lovecraft first? I assume most people know who Lovecraft was, and but maybe we should just mention it briefly anyway.
Maybe just very briefly. It's something I feel as if that's been talked to death.
Well, he's the truest prophet of them all, even better than Jesus.
So maybe you could say Lovecraft is the grandfather of modern horror.
You know, him and Edgar Allan Poe for sure, but I think modern horror. I think horror in the way that we think of it. He is one of the great grandfathers of, for sure.
And his work all had similar kind of themes to it. You know, usually ancient evil gods which are locked behind some barrier in another dimension where it's like a prison, and they're sleeping and waiting to break through into our world. And they're gods of chaos too. So
yeah, they don't care about us puny humans at all.
It is the one true religion.
That's right. His work is basically it revolves around our humans' inability to comprehend these beings and events and places. So much so, or so little so, that we can go insane by simply viewing them for a second.
Well, you either worship Cthulhu and die, or you don't worship Cthulhu and you also die.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I'm going to mention a little event from Stephen King's It, which is also a very Lovecraftian story, his most Lovecraftian book, next to probably The Dark Tower or The Mist, which we're talking about tonight. There's a character in that book who looks upon it, the creature It, in its truest form that we can comprehend, and his brain essentially melts. Thousands of aneurysms all at once. Because physically he couldn't it was so disgusting and so horrific and so incomprehensible that his body basically just gave up and his mind broke.
You mean South Park's kind of adorable chibi representation of Cthulhu wasn't accurate?
Well, I mean, I hate to say it, and also love to say it. Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was awfully cute.
He was.
So.
That's what I picture him like, for realsies.
Yeah.
He totally exists, though.
Anyway, though, yeah. Well, I'm sure he told you in a dream.
Several.
But no, he basically writes about the incomprehensible and our inability to truly grasp these things that are way grander than us.
Yeah, sometimes they're more supernatural in his writing. Sometimes they're more alien.
Yeah,
he tends to go back and forth between those two things.
Yeah, what I always took from it, I haven't read most of his work. I've read maybe 12 stories of his over the years. I've tried to read a few. I actually find his writing to be pretty dry.
It is very dry.
I don't know if I mean that as a negative criticism. It's just really...
It's just his writing style.
It's not my thing, but... yeah, alien and supernatural, I feel it's most
interchangeable.
Interchangeable. It's right in the middle. Personally, I thought of most of it as more alien, more grounded in reality, more than supernatural. And the cults that are here on Earth in his stories are essentially just insane madmen worshiping something they don't even understand.
Yes, they're alien. It's alien Jesus.
Yeah, and sometimes the great old ones or the gods that they're worshiping don't even know about them because we're so insignificant. So these tribes, they worship a great old one or an elder god like Cthulhu, and I mean Cthulhu knows, but other ones don't. They don't even care that they're being worshipped.
Well, they're not all omniscient.
No.
Or omnipresent. They're just kind of big, scary, ancient.
You know, when it comes right down to it, absolutely, yeah. Some of them literally live in space and don't even need to breathe.
The ones
and some of them are more supernatural and they're more ghost-like.
The ones that live on Earth and have been here for millennia, did they come from Earth? Because we can't really call them aliens, we're the aliens. They were here first.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if he makes it clear. I mean, I read Lovecraft's work back in the 90s, so that was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I bought his omnibuses and binged them over a period of time. So I haven't read him in a long time. So
yeah,
I can't remember if he ever states where they actually come from. But they're locked away trying to get to our plane.
And many of them aren't trying to get to our plane because they just don't care. Like the most famous one, Cthulhu, has been sleeping on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean for billions of years, probably since a billion years after the Earth was formed.
Yeah, he was here first.
Well, certainly. But he's, from what I gather, and just from my own thoughts on it, he's most certainly not from Earth. Just like most of the great old ones aren't. They exist either in a different dimension or literally in the far reaches of space.
Or maybe they're like fourth dimensional or something.
Yeah, like that. A lot of
so that's why we can't comprehend them.
Yeah, we couldn't possibly understand. Even if they told us, we still wouldn't get it.
Well, I don't even think we'd be able to communicate with them.
Well, even if we could, it would just be so beyond us. That's his idea, that it would be so beyond us that we can never comprehend. And those that try just go insane and lose themselves or die.
Yeah, Lovecraft was also good friends with Robert E. Howard, which
he was. Yeah. Most famous for, I believe, Conan.
Yep. I don't know if they ever met, but I think they were good pen.
They wrote letters back and forth.
Yeah. That's kind of cute.
Well, yeah, they spoke a lot of what they spoke of, from what I gathered, is like a lot of personal stuff too. They sent a lot of letters back and forth that weren't even really about their work. So,
and they both gained most of their success after they died too, which is interesting.
oh, that's something we should mention. H.P. Lovecraft gained very little success in his writing career while he was alive. Very little. He was mocked a lot.
Isn't that true of most artists, though?
Oh, I don't know about most, but a lot, yeah.
A lot of artists.
Well, I would say most maybe in that era.
I would say artists who are ahead of their time, most definitely.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. I think Miss Anon brought up an interesting point just now. I think it is a product. They are a product of their time, and they were shunned for that because of the genres that they wrote in, for the most part.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people tried to get Lovecraft in particular banned for being racist.
Well, yeah, I mean that's more of a modern sensibility.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
more so now than.
yeah, we could get into that and talk about the politics of that for all night.
Yeah,
I think we should probably just avoid that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a can of worms.
Yeah, all I'll say on that is it's being blown out of proportion in our modern times.
We shouldn't censor art anyways. You're not meant to take lessons from this guy.
Well, I mean, a lot of it was personal letters of his. That's where all of this hate towards him comes from, and a certain cat's name, a certain black cat's name, in a certain book. And people just blow that out of proportion and assume that he was some actually horribly racist ogre, when unfortunately for them, that's not really the case, and there's a hell of a lot more nuance to it than that. Not simply being a product of its time. So that's all I'll say on that to
avoid the can of worms.
Yeah, yes.
I'll put the lid back on that can of worms. So, which movie are we talking about first?
The Void.
The Void. Yeah. Before we get into the plot, I gotta say I didn't realize this until I watched the two movies together. But I have to speculate that maybe parts of the Void were influenced from beyond, because both have a doctor who opens an extra dimensional porthole and transforms physically, and there's a lot of body horror, Cronenberg type body horror stuff in it. So I have to wonder whether the writer may have been a fan of From Beyond. It could just be a coincidence. But
the writer certainly most likely is a fan of From Beyond, the story, the Lovecraft story, and the film. But I think this is just a matter of the movie being Lovecraftian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so from a similar genre. Yeah,
it's a similar space. It is Lovecraftian.
Similar source material.
Yeah, the same source material, really.
Yeah.
The Void is Lovecraftian in the sense that the Thing is. It probably wouldn't exist if Lovecraft didn't exist. So I think many of Lovecraft's stories feature what you've just said, even if it's not a doctor per se. It's somebody opening up something they don't understand, whether it's a portal or a telekinetic ability in their head or something, anything. It's about somebody unlocking something or finding somebody or finding something and not being able to deal with that in some form or another, or gaining great power from it, and then it bites them in the ass. That's a theme of probably 75% of Lovecraft stories. So I think it's more of a Lovecraft thing than based on a certain film thing.
Well, I think doctors are they sort of make people uncomfortable anyways.
Yeah.
A little bit.
The other thing I thought of when I was watching it again was I wonder if Precinct 13 may have been an influence.
Oh, certainly. The Siege movie, for sure. Yeah, there is a lot of Assault on Precinct 13, John Carpenter's second film. Yeah, that movie is eerily similar to The Void. Well,
Yeah,
rather,
actually.
Void is eerily similar to Assault on Precinct 13, but in this case, I think imitation is the best form of flattery. I think they did it quite well.
Well, I think
contrived.
anything is influenced by numerous different things. You know,
Yes.
we all see things and like things, and then distill down what we like about them into something new. I mean, Star Wars was made from dozens and dozens of different influences.
Was it?
Yeah.
Original.
Star Wars was even
No,
influenced.
but it came out something new.
Yeah, it certainly did. Yeah, it was a completely new thing at the time for the most part. But I mean, I've heard some people describe Star Wars as a Western in space, which is kind of true.
Yeah, and it
And
was also influenced by the Hidden Castle from Akira Kurosawa.
Yes.
And most definitely Dune as well.
Oh, the stories of Dune. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, what's the old saying? If you take from one thing, you're stealing. If you take from many things, it's inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I can see different possible inspirations in the Void.
I also see the Thing in the Void as well.
Oh yes, definitely. I thought of that too. There's a scene where I think it's the dead nurse is transforming, and you see the tentacle things on her face.
Yeah,
and they kind of jump and dart around.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is something that only the audience sees, just like in the Thing.
Yeah. And I thought that reminds me definitely of the Thing, and they've probably used the same special effect as well.
Well,
it looks awesome.
It does. The effects are quite well done.
I assume they blow air into it or something to make it jump around. I don't know.
I believe so. Yeah, that's generally what they do with things like that.
They could be filming it backwards too. Like
that happens.
They pull it in and then reverse the footage so it looks like they're coming out.
That's a trick that can work really well or really horribly, depending on the skill of the puppeteer and the cameraman.
And editing.
And editing, yes, which is a lot. It's a wholly different beast than it was in 1982 when the Thing came out. So
yeah, they do that with a lot of things where it's easier to film it going back. So they film it going backwards and then just reverse the footage. If it's edited right, it looks really good. So
yeah. So anyway, The Void is a Lovecraftian siege movie, I guess I could call it.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah. Just think of it as like Assault on Cthulhu 13 or something. Which isn't bad. This is a good thing. It turned out really well, especially with the small budget of approximately $200,000.
Is that all?
That is it.
Wow, that is really impressive then.
Yeah, all the special effects, or most of them, were actually crowdfunded.
Oh, that's really cool.
On Indiegogo. It's directed by Stephen Kostansky and Jeremy Gillespie. They're two members of the collective called Astron 6.
Did they write it as well, or?
Yes, they both did. Yeah, they both.
Which is pretty common for low budget movies.
It is, yeah. They are just a third. There are 5 members of Astron 6, cheeky buggers. They're immensely talented dudes.
Our favorite blonde Australian was missing from this movie, though.
Yeah, he was. They recently just started branching out on their own, and it started with The Void. Stephen Kostansky, the main director of this film, actually directed Leprechaun Returns last year, which was a pretty decent schlocky semi-remake of the terrible Leprechaun franchise. So,
it's not terrible.
So, well, it's a lot of fun, but it is certainly schlocky. But they're starting to branch out, and these are really hard-working guys. They've directed numerous films in the past as Astron 6, all 5 of them as the collective. Father's Day, Manborg, a really, really cool Disco Path Suspiria-esque giallo film called The Editor, which is basically a horror comedy.
I love horror comedy.
Yeah, they're all Canadian, and they specialize in making really cool horror films on really tight budgets.
Except one. One of them's a real live, definitely Australian.